I press record.
Is the picture okay at your end?
Yeah, it's fine my end. I do that. It's really lovely to hear the genius that is Ralph Pearce. Thank you so much for joining the collective, as they say. I know I've had the privilege of meeting you before in Norwich when you I think it was the Western Territorial Staff Band were doing the UK tour.
Yep.
So it was really nice to finally meet you there and just sort of meet you in person, but a chance to talk a little bit about the compositional career of Mr. Pearce. Now, I know that you don't come from the United States originally. How did you get in so when you were starting out, how did you know that you had this gift of composition that was, you know, likable to people outside the four walls of your own house? Where did that start?
I was at university in Glasgow, and at the time I didn't think it was a great education because of all the stuff, but we had to write 500 to 600 measures of music every week, which is a tremendous amount. But what it has meant is that the blank piece of paper is never scary. You can always put something down. I then had done some stuff. We had a couple of very good composition teachers, a guy called Martin Dolby, who sadly passed away recently, another guy called George Newsom, who I had to be honest, I didn't like. His personal hygiene wasn't of the highest, let's just put it that way. But he told us some great stuff. One of the things, we had our class was 8 people. We had 3 keyboard players, so we had a harpsichord, a piano, and a little filicorder organ. You're probably too young to remember those. And then we had a couple of flute players, clarinet player, a couple of trombone players, and he sent us away one day, go and write something for this group and bring it next week. Well, one of the guys came back the following week with nothing. And this guy he absolutely hit the roof, and he said, why have you brought nothing? The guy said, I didn't get inspired. And he said, it's not an inspiration thing, it's a job thing. He said, if I sent you away to build a table, I'd want 4 legs and a flat surface so nothing rolled off. He said, if you're really good, you might produce Hepplewhite, but otherwise you might just produce IKEA. But, you know, it's a case of this is a craft, and I thought about that way. We had a very good wifey band at the Springburn Chorus at Glasgow University. I wrote a march called The Caledonian. Yeah,
lovely march.
Which was my first piece for the army, actually the second piece published. And
third, I think Harvest Home Bits It. Your first published piece is 1978, Sing to God, according to the official index.
The first published piece was a selection called Sing to God.
Yeah, according to the official index I've been given, yeah.
Sing to God.
If you want to counteract that, you're the guy who wrote it, so I'm not going to contradict you, sir.
And I don't know, I haven't checked on that, but that was the first thing. And then a little while longer, the Harvest
Home.
The march came out. Harvest Home had a very strange genesis. We had a strange officer. They do exist.
Yes, I've seen a few.
And we had a thing booked for our harvest weekend, and the people who were going to come got sick, so we had nothing. And this guy had to, well, we'll just all show up and something will happen. Well, we thought this is not very likely. So there were 4 guys living close to me. So I wrote it for a slightly different ensemble to the Unity series scoring. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was a cornet, a trombone, a tenor horn, and a euphonium. And so I then sent it to the late lamented Colonel Stedman Allen, who said, well, make it into a Unity series piece. And so it was published in Unity series, and also then came out in a sort of favorite Unity series. Mm-hmm. And so that's how that one came about. I wrote a march called Cumbernauld because my wife's sister's husband was the bandmaster there. And then there was another piece, and then it went kind of quiet until I started doing stuff when I became the DMD in Phoenix, because I actually felt that trying to establish the job was more important than sitting down writing. But then it became possible to write for the groups I had.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting because, I mean, I remember Harvest Home was a staple of Woodbridge Core Band for many years because it was not a sort of very short piece, but it was an effective, very quick play of getting the message across. And it wasn't kind of, you didn't have to have a PhD, you could play it and the people knew it, and it was kind of instinctive and straightforward. It wasn't a complicated piece. And when you've had the Harvest Supper and you want to get to the message, that fitted the bill properly. I remember it played for years, and it wasn't until about 2 years ago I actually found a recording of it. And I just wish I'd have got a tape recorder out as I recorded it, because we played it so often. So it's a lovely piece to have, and for Harvest it seems to get overlooked for some reason, for suites and stuff. But so who was it the YP band at your local corps that got the first Genesis, or you started in university? So
I was doing. I finished at Glasgow University, and went down to Cardiff University to do a master's in composition, and started doing some fairly esoteric stuff that got you a degree, but nobody wanted to listen to it. You know, what a friend of mine used to call squeaky wheel and rusty brake drum music, and
interesting combination.
Well, you listen to some avant-garde stuff that was being produced in the 70s, and I think that's a pretty decent description. But started writing stuff for the corps, started getting stuff accepted, and then all of a sudden, late 80s, early 90s, it really sort of blossomed. A lot of stuff being written, a lot of solos. Being in the States, made some good relationships with various staff band people. So wrote pieces of different length, different complexity. Ultimately, I felt the responsibility was to write music that was useful. It's what Colonel Stedman Allen would call, he was in my house, he was there for the weekend, and this piece came by a composer who, I'm not quite sure of his name, and if it was, I wouldn't mention it, but he said, "Oh, this guy's good. He writes useful music. You know, it can be used by the very best of bands, but also small bands with limited players can still make a decent job of it, and I think that's important."
Yeah, it's something I've heard a lot of from some of the most preeminent composers out there who've been, like yourself, composing for years. They said, yes, you can sit down and write the next Carnegie Hall thing for the New York Staff Band, but that would only get used once at the anniversary or the big festival. He said, you can write the march or the hymn tune arrangement for the smaller bands, and it will getting used and getting used and getting used. He said, there's not much point in writing a piece of music that just sits on the shelf because it's too complex. Lovely to write and to be used. So I understand the functionality of writing for smaller ensembles. It seems to be the bread and butter of many composers.
It's actually more difficult to write, I think, for smaller groups. You've got to make it something that is going to sound at least different. It's not just a 4-part harmony thing, but it's got to have some character. I have, and it's released privately, a thing called the Cactus series. Yeah, because we were in Arizona. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
And there are other reasons for calling it a Cactus series, but probably not in this format. And these were pieces. We had my wife's best friend. She was a tremendous teacher of beginner brass. She was capable of looking after many groups, but she was thorough. She was nice with the kids, but firm. Got great results out of them. And on one year, she said, you know, the kids, they play little pieces that we put together on manuscript paper. Why don't we, because by that time I was using computers, why don't you write something for them and it's printed out on it looks like proper music, as she put it. The kids would like that. And so I started putting this together. The first one is a setting of God is So Good, in which, apart from the tune, nobody has more than 3 notes. Now, that's like trying to do the Times crossword in 3D. To make it work, keeping it simple so that the kids actually have got something. They have the tune, and I think the second cornet part has a C, a B, and an E, and that's about it. And trying to get those things to work. And the sheer technical thing, what do you play?
I'm a percussionist. I'm a bass drummer normally.
Okay. Well, if you think in terms of a second cornet player, second cornet might play a G, which is okay. But if you use the same format that we use for, say, Unity series, which was how we were putting it together, the second horn part and the second cornet part rather, and the first horn part, if the second cornet's got a G, the first horn's got a D. And for a beginner player, that's not always the easiest. So you've got all those things to try and put together to make it work. And so I found the intricacies of that fabulous. There's about 14 of these pieces, and 3 of them were published in the second volume of First Things First.
Yeah.
I was rather pleased because I was asked to alter one piece because one part was thought to be a little difficult for the scope. And I thought, great, our kids could do it. You know, we didn't have to alter it for them.
So, when you've got a commission come through to you, I mean, it obviously depends on the band, but do you start out with a pen and paper, or is it straight to the computer if you know what the tune is going to be? Or if they say, can we have a throwaway piece for the concert? And it's kind of, can you come up with something if you've got something in the works? How does the process start for you now?
We have over here in the States a tremendous thing every 2 years called the North American Composers Forum.
Yeah, I've heard.
And we, those of us who are experienced, work with these young people. And Bill Himes is a great character, very, very clever man. If he never wrote a piece of music, you would recognize him as a very clever guy.
Yes.
And he was telling people that, you know, you should write in sketch, don't write straight onto score. And there are 2 major works of mine that he very much enjoys. So I said, you like that? He said, oh yeah. So, well, that went straight onto score. That's the way my brain thinks. When I start to put things onto score, I can probably, there was a big piece I did for the Albert Hall for the New York Staff Band called The Cry of the Warriors.
Yes, I was listening to it earlier. Fantastic piece.
That took 3 days to write. But I don't know if it took 3 days to write, because Ron Wakes-Norris asked me to do it, and it was sort of percolating in the brain for probably 2 months. And then it's a case of, right, I'll sit down and I'll put this together. And, you know, having set them in, so there's probably about 3 12-hour days of getting it together, straight into the score.
Yeah.
Occasionally there are little technical bits with a lot of counterpoint. I've got a little book. Let me see if I can find the little book. Here's the little book. And it's full of manuscript paper, and it's great for writing down sketch. You know, I mean, fun?
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, lovely. I can see it.
You know, and that's the sort of the things I needed to do. And so do it on that, and then sort of build it up to the score. And so that's basically how I work. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody else. One of the things about this Composers Forum is that I love to do it because you're kind of paying forward. People have helped me.
Yeah.
Ray Stemmer was a tremendous help. I've never, at 2 universities, I've never come across anybody with such technical facility that he had. Les Condon was a good friend. So these people,
I envy you. I envy you. I was only 4 years old when he died. I envy you.
I went to the funeral. It was very, very moving. The ISB played Piece of Heart, and they just got through it and no more. It was so moving. I mean, we didn't expect it to happen. What I thought was he was a true bandsman. He obviously knew he wasn't well. He put his bass down and then fell on the floor and died. I mean, that's a true bandsman for you. But no, he was a tremendous. He is the reason probably I'm still a Salvationist. As Les, yeah. And
Yeah.
so,
That really doesn't support. I was speaking to his daughter Dot earlier this week and just saying, you hear some people who say, oh, he must have been on an off day or in a bad mood. I said, I have yet to hear anyone say a bad word about Leslie Condon. I said,
I'm a Tilney Hall guy. I was in the famous Tilney Hall band that played Present Age.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to have a devotional meeting on Thursday night. And of course, it was all guys in those days. It wasn't a mixed school. And there was, what we actually did, once the schedule was over, we got in cars and went across to Sunbury Court. But we don't talk about that. That's when the girls were in their camp, you see. It's
a lovely place, Sunbury Court.
Oh?
It's a lovely place, Sunbury Court.
Especially when the girls were at school there, yeah. And we had we'd had this tremendous devotional meeting, and I was quite. You should have known me when I was 19 because I knew everything. I knew stuff that nobody knew, and I came out of that meeting a little bit concerned, and I wandered around the gorgeous grounds. It's now a bijou hotel if you want to go. I think it's something like $300 or £300 a night. And there was Les standing, obviously deep in prayer. And I wandered off and he said, come here. And he proceeded to take me apart and then put me back together again.
Yeah.
And I could always go to Les. And when he passed away, of course, the problem was I was at an age where you don't suddenly take on people that you can completely open up to. You get to about 24, 25, and you think, nah, I'm not sure I can actually find someone else. I'm an officer's kid.
Oh, I didn't know that. You're an MK.
Yep, both parents now passed away. I also said the problem was when you're a kid in the army and you're mad with the officer, you can't go to your father. When you're mad with your father, you can't go to the officer, you know. Yeah. I could go to Les.
Yeah.
And that was the thing. And I never really found anyone else quite like that.
Very nice guy. When you're sort of looking at doing a hymn tune arrangement or a selection, or you've been asked to do a solo based on a very famous hymn tune like St. Denio, you know, there are obviously many arrangements and Stedman Allen's and James Kerner ones, of Ken Downey ones have gone before. How do you approach it and sort of make it original to yourself? And say, I'm not trying to clone what Bill Himes did with his version or Stedman Allen did with his version.
One of the things I do is when I'm working with a hymn tune, I find a small motif, about 6-8 notes, which are very obviously from the tune, but I sort of work on that, develop it, and try and frequently find you can build it in contrapuntally. And so it's a case of, right, we've got this here. I'm going to work on that idea. Frequently, I will start out with that. I did a solo for the American Band Journal. I was asked to do it on our little town of Bethlehem, Forest Green, because most people don't use that tune over here in the States. And there was just one little snippet, which is the introduction in a slightly different key, and then bring it all together. One of the things I try to do is, I mean, when I did The Cry of the Warriors, I was asked to write it on Men of Harlech, which worked for me because my father was in the Warriors session, and you can check it out on regalxylophone.com. The Warriors session actually with their band and cadets' voices, they recorded it. Quite a decent cadets band. They had a guy called Ron Harrison on soprano. They had Ray Bowes on cornet. Because these guys had just come out of the Second World War. Yeah. So all of a sudden there was an influx. It was moving to me to write something based on my father's experience. I then got hold of all the available recordings I could of it to make sure that there was no way that I could repeat it. Because years and years earlier, I had done what I thought was a very fine arrangement of Mellow Harlech. And I'm driving home from, we were putting on a school production, I'm driving home late at night. And there was, in those days, a number of the guys would put on brass band music on the radio. And this guy, I just turned the radio on, and there is my arrangement of Men of Harlech. Except it was no, it was still on the piano in manuscript. It hadn't been. I had heard the Gordon Langford arrangement years and years previously, and when pushed for something, I had done something that was remarkably similar to the Gordon Langford. Got home, took it off the piano, and put it on the furnace, because we had a coal-fired central heating furnace in those days, and that was the end of that. I thought, right, this is not going to happen again, and you know, it can happen.
How do you sort of you're into a piece of music, and you're really happy, and it's sort of melding together, and then you come back and you realise after that's out of a commercial you heard on the TV, and you kind of have to rewrite it and you have to destroy it to make it original. Does that ever happen?
Well, that was the thing with the Men of Harlech.
Yeah.
You know, it hasn't happened since. I've been very careful to frequently use tunes that no one else has done. I'm surprised that you made a comment about Whisper of Prayer. You hadn't seen many arrangements of that?
Doesn't ring any bells. No, I haven't come across it personally.
Well, so I thought it was you. Somebody has photocopied the Solar Cornet page and Whisper of Prayer. It's a general serious thing, and said they didn't know, they hadn't heard the chorus for a long time and didn't know there was a band arrangement of it.
That doesn't surprise me.
And one of the things I'm trying to do now is incorporate contemporary songs with a traditional, what I like to call, I don't know the word traditional, I prefer the word classic, a classic Salvation Army, and it's sort of blend them together because they've got a similar spiritual content, similar aim, and that's something I'm trying to do, to sort of show that we can work with both, and both are valid, as long as the theology is okay in the song itself. Because some of them, you know, they're a bit weird.
Yeah. I think I was Soldiers of the Flag I was listening to a while ago, and it really reminded me of a piece of music by a guy called Richard Spicer called The Colours, and it felt very similar because I think he used very similar tunes. I don't know much about Richard Spicer because I think he only had 2 or 3 pieces published and then died of a heart attack or something. Richard
arrived as a divisional music director in San Francisco about 6 weeks after I arrived in Phoenix.
Oh, really?
He came from Derby. A lot of good musicians have come out of Derby. I don't know. The sad thing is they've come out of
Derby.
Pardon?
I've never been there.
Oh, it's nothing special, but the core has got a tremendous tradition of army music. Richard had become the music director at Buffalo, New York, that division there. Didn't get on well with the divisional commander. It wasn't entirely his fault, because a lot of people didn't get on with that particular colonel. So most of us, we would have problems perhaps with our leaders. You got used to it. I mean, if nothing else, it was a paycheck. And so, as a friend of mine said, don't worry, they'll be gone long before you are.
Yes.
Anyway.
Colonels don't hang about, do they?
Richard Ivor Bzanko got him a job in San Francisco, where he got on with the only divisional commander that no one could get on with, but Richard got it. They got on together fine. It was sort of a match made in heaven. He wrote a couple of things. he died very suddenly.
Yeah.
And
I came across him by accident, and I was astounded that he kind of didn't get the chance to blossom, because I think a march called Concord and definitely The Suite of the Colours. And when I was listening to Soldiers of the Flag, I really felt it was almost akin to, not saying you'd copied it or he copied you. I don't know which way around it was written, but
I think around about the same time. Soldiers of the Flag was written because we were taking an ensemble, 10, 12 people, to Alaska for their Congress. The Alaska Congress is like nothing else. The Salvation Army in the islands on the South Alaska that sort of join up, there's a mountain range. On the other side of that is Canada, and they're all fishing villages. And the army is probably the biggest church in these little villages all over the place. They vie to host the Congress, and we were going there, and the TC was the guest for that year, and he was retiring. So we wrote this. I just discovered what his favorite songs were, and we put that together as a sort of a farewell tribute to him. And the other memorable thing about that weekend was that we had salmon. 5 days, 3 meals every day, salmon. Now, salmon is wonderful, but 15 meals back to back, I didn't realize there were so many ways of preparing salmon. But of course, the thing is, I did the music camp in Alaska, and I had this young man who was a bit of a pain. He gradually came around and started becoming quite a decent bass player. And I'm telling the kids how we're going to do our bit on the concert, how we're going to come up and sit down and all this. And he says, I won't be at the concert. I said, excuse me. He said, well, we've got to go fishing, by which he meant his parents had a fishing boat, and they had a quota as to how much fish they could catch and when they could go and catch it.
Yeah.
And so it literally was all hands on deck. Everyone in the family had to be involved in the trip. So all of a sudden, my bass player disappeared just when he was making it. Oh. DC at the time was a decent guy. He played, and so he played bass for me. But interesting things happen. I should probably write a book.
Well, send me a copy. I do remember, I think probably one of your marches that, I love the Phoenician and the Outriders, but I remember we played Camp Ponderosa, because I think everyone was of the age when they remembered the show, but a lot of people didn't realise that there's a Salvation Army Corps in that district, and it was written for the faithful soldiers of that corps. Can you tell us a bit about how you came to write it and how?
Camp Ponderosa is the name of the camp that the Southwest Division owns. We'd had a camp called Camp Wood, and unfortunately we hadn't been able to purchase the ground in time in front of it. It became public property, and some very strange people would camp out there, and we didn't like the possibility of bringing our kids. And it's all right telling kids they mustn't go off the camp. As soon as you say they mustn't go off the camp, a whole bunch of them would decide, yeah, but that's the thing to do. So we bought this property and developed it. And I was asked to put together a sort of 6-7 piece group to go up for the groundbreaking. And so wrote the little march. You'll remember that God is So Good is in there. It's not a simple arrangement, but I felt it was important. God is So Good has been played every year that I was at 25 years. God is So Good was played at some point by the beginners. And so that had to be in there. And of course, finishing up with a bit of the theme music from the TV series Bonanza, which was based at the Ponderosa. Ponderosa pine is a tree. And so it's some of those trees were around. And so it was written for that. And the first year the camp was open, we were asked to take part in a parade to the little village there. And so we had T-shirts with the Silver Cornet part written on the back. If I'd had more money, I could have put all the different parts on the back, and people wouldn't have needed any music.
Oh, just as long as you don't go in the swimming pool like some of these music camps do and play hornpipe from the water music in the middle of the swimming pool. I think that would quite damage it. But it's very. I mean, was there a euphonium duet called Glory that was
Yes.
done? Because I came across that on YouTube the other day, and I thought that was. I hadn't really had a chance to listen to it fully, but it was kind of an accidental find. But what's the story behind Glory? Because it's fairly new to me, so it could be one
Oh,
of the first pieces you ever wrote, for all I know.
it's been around for a long time. It was written for two guys. I can't remember, one guy's David something, and Chris Mallett.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, lovely guy.
Chris Mallett was my opposite number. He was in Southern Cal. We shared a somewhat, let's say, vigorous sense of humour, and we had great. Sometimes we'd call each other up, and apparently people at both ends would ask us to call it because they couldn't get on with it because of the noise we were making. So it was written for those two, and I'd always wanted to use the tune Denmark Hill.
That tune again, it keeps popping up.
Glory, glory, Jesus saves me. And the quick bit is glory to his name.
Mm-hmm.
And both very, very talented euphonium players. David was our principal euphonium in the staff band that you would have heard. And so the recording I've got, it was done by the youth band, divisional youth band, which didn't have a bass trombone player for the recording. So I went along and did that. And so that was written for that, and it was first performed by Chris Mallett and another fairly prominent euphonium player who has become world famous, and the memory is gone. I can't think of the guy's name. It'll come back to me.
Yeah.
And that was quite something. How those two, it went a lot quicker than I ever imagined it. Stephen Mead.
Mm-hmm.
So Stephen Mead and Chris Mallett as euphonium duet, not too shabby.
No, not too shabby at all. So yeah, I mean, it was very fascinating to hear that. Looking across, I mean, you don't really have the kind of, well, I say, a fingerprint of a go-to composer for a certain thing, because there's lectures, marches, festival arrangements. Bless me, I don't know what that is. Cornet arrangement. So there's sort of nothing you've not wanted to try. So is it just a fresh challenge if someone comes to you and says, "I'd like a horn solo, a cornet solo"? Well, I haven't done one of them for a while. Is that a challenge? You kind of go, ah.
Solo is very much a case of according to commission. I've had there's been a couple of solo albums being produced in the East here, and they will call up and say, "Will you please write a solo on this tune?" So okay, that's you've got your material, or will you write a? We have a thing called Star Search over in the West. It's I suppose it's kind of a competition. Americans love competition. I don't like it in that you'll have a small corps that's really worked terribly hard to put a symphony together, and then one of the big corps comes along, and I mean, where we are at Montclair, we tend to win everything. But wifey band practice is conducted by Aaron Vanderweel, Ron Wakes Norris, staff band, me, and a guy called Chris Jowdis, who's the leading trumpet player on Broadway. So these are the people who are teaching the kids. The kids have got no idea who any of us is. It's just Ron and Ralph and Chris.
Yeah, it's the locals. It's the people they see, isn't it?
Which is good. But I mean, what it means is that our kids have got access to sort of big money teachers if they had to go in the outside. So to sort of say that we've got a better wifey band than any other one division, yes, we do, but it's not difficult because also you've got a lot of people there who are totally into army music, and they go home and they listen to it all the time. And my granddaughter wins all the singing competitions. She's now, last year she was 11, she's now 12, and she was up against 16-year-olds and still won. But there again, I work with her. I sometimes write stuff that sort of absolutely fits her voice. Her grandmother, my wife, was a very fine singer. Worked so that this kid, and her other grandfather is Charlie Baker, whose wife is Michelle, who was a horn player in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. You know, it's really not fair, but life isn't fair. So, you know, I mean, so
you can't help who your YP bandmaster is, can you? So if you want to sort of do a competition, you will go to your YP bandmaster and say, look, I'm trying to do this. Could you help? Because they're going to want to be there. They can't help being who they are.
Last couple of years, I've actually written pieces. There's a piece they have to play that's a sort of compulsory, and then they've got their own choice. And I've done a bit of the European Band Championships and write music for our kids to play, and really highlight our very good players, and to a certain extent hide our less good players, but they're still making a contribution. So yeah, they're fortunate in that respect. But I mean, bless me, most of the time I'm asked to write things, and so because of the training I had at universities, I sit down and write something. We had once a year we had a divisional inspection, and people from THQ would come down, and we were the only division in the territory that always had a band to play, because there was always a little service before, you know, ask the Lord to bless them, and then they tear apart what we've been doing for the last year. This was one of the worst meetings I have ever been in. It was absolutely woeful. It was led by somebody I didn't like, who had been my boss at one point, who had been thoroughly unpleasant to my wife. So that you can be unpleasant to me, and that's okay. I might, if you're taking my wife and child, look out. And so I wasn't happy that we had to listen to her droning on. She then, as the prayer chorus, had the chorus, Bless Me Now. Very rarely happens. By the time I'd walked across the parking lot to my office, the arrangement was there. And so I sat down and wrote it. That's been used quite a lot. There's one of the Dutch bands has used it quite a lot, and they recorded it on one of the big festivals they did. You know.
I haven't got it marked down, so it's on the list, but I haven't been able to track a recording of it to sort of be able to listen to the fingerprint and sort of get a gist of it. So, I mean, I was surprised at what I had got from your pen. Obviously, I think one of my favourites is the Phoenician. I think I read somewhere that you actually marked on the score that you were finishing it in your study, and because I'm living on the mountain underneath a cloudless sky, and it was like 30 degrees when you were trying to finish this piece of music off.
It was November. It was the middle of November, and it was about 37 degrees.
Wow.
So, it was a gorgeous day, and I thought, what else would you do? And that was the first. That was written for the divisional band in Phoenix to play at the opening of a new corps. And actually, it was a great idea because it was the corps had Glendale had grown, and had a lot of Spanish speaking. So they were profitably able to split the corps to English speaking, Spanish speaking, and still have congregations of over 150, which for the army is pretty good. And so that was basically for us to play at the end of the program. The commissioner, who later became General Rader, he was doing this, and so just at the end, after the benediction, we go into this, and it was a brilliant idea. And like all brilliant ideas, it's not always thought through. They decided to release balloons, and the balloons had tickets on them, and there was a prize for the balloon that traveled the furthest. It was postage paid, you could send it back. And also it had please contact your local Salvation Army Corps. I'm sure they'll be glad to hear from you, all this sort of thing. So off we do. We let the balloons go, and suddenly realised we're right underneath the flight path going into Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. And we thought, we got lucky on that one, but that could have been nasty.
Few sucked into the jet engines.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. I think the other one that caught me out was, now correct me if I'm wrong, because I've got the Outriders.
Yeah.
Now, does that have We Bring the Sacrifice of Praise in that one?
The Outriders was written for the Division of Youth Bands tour of Great Britain in '96.
Okay.
And somehow I got hold of a very early version of All the World magazine. It's still, they're still produced. And there was an article there about the Army's growth into the Western USA. And they had this picture of an Apache Indian. I don't know why, because there were no Apaches in Arizona, but what does that matter?
Dramatic license, artistic license, I think they call it.
The truth only confuses the issue. But they said that they were looking for Salvationist outriders to start the work. So I thought that'd be good. We were going on tour, and so we were bringing the Sacrifice of Praise with us as we went along. And so that march came about because of that. We recorded it, New York Staff Band recorded it, and it's got some. Ron Wake's Norris says you can hear a gunfight in it. I don't know. I only wrote it. What would I know? But that was how that came about. And interestingly enough, the number, I think it's something like 1893 in the General Series, which was the year that the Army started in...
It's 1998 General Series, published 2002.
Yeah, but that number was the same number as the year that the Army came to Arizona.
The 1898, yeah. It was interesting because we were playing through Nick Samuel's The Goldtonian, and he uses the same tune, and he says, I don't know, I nicked it from Ralph's piece of music. He said it was just, it fitted the We Bring the Sacrifice of Praise. And he said, I don't know where he got it from, I just like the tune.
It's a song that was very popular in at youth councils and things, and it was done in a fairly robust style as in the march, but then people would repeat the last chorus, we offer unto you, and it would slow right down and become quite a devotional prayer. We offer unto you our sacrifices of thanksgiving, we offer our sacrifice of praise, calming it all down and sort of, yes, it can be boys, but the same thing, the same words can really become a devotional. And so it was a song that was much used by the kids. The kids loved it. It meant something to them.
Yeah.
And so we put it in the march. And I'm not sure that, again, there were certain, I did write a piece for the tour, Rhapsody of Praise and Worship. And it's one of the few pieces I've had that was told they couldn't publish it because the tunes weren't known generally in Great Britain.
Really?
Oh no, you wouldn't have heard this piece. The thing is, I sometimes say, well, yeah, that's fine, but there've been a lot of pieces published, and we don't know the tunes over here either.
It's one of the questions I do like to ask. I mean, bearing in mind that you've originated from the UK and you're now in America, you've seen the cultural difference. You've seen the fact that Americans will use completely different tunes to what you would have grown up with. So if you have a tune that's not known to you or is how, if someone comes and says, we want a tune for our music school in Norway or Zimbabwe, and we want this tune, and you don't recognise it at all, how do you handle that?
Well, there's two ways of doing it. I mean, we had, if they want the tune in a piece, I ask them for the most reliable manuscript of that tune and work with it technically. At core level, For 14 years, we had the same officer as Canadian. Actually, he's from Newfoundland, which is a whole different animal.
Yeah.
Huge amount of Salvation Army is very, very strong. Probably 25% of people in Newfoundland are Salvationists.
Wow.
And very, very similar to the Salvation Army in Britain. And this Major Lacey would always give me the songs on Sunday, on a Wednesday night for band practice. And so we'd use those tunes to warm up. And sometimes he would give me a tune, and the question, we'd play it through, okay, are we okay with that for Sunday? Is that going to be known by the congregation? And sometimes it wasn't, so what tune would you use to these words? We do that. Sometimes, however, there was a case that the major really wanted that tune. It meant something for him. And so it's a case, all right, we'll play it before the meeting a couple of times. We'll play it once again before we start. Probably run it through with the songsters. And so we got some people who could sing it. And because frequently there are songs that mean a great deal to you. And it's the tune as much as the words.
Yeah. So, do you prefer to conduct or to play your pieces? I mean, if the opportunity says, we're going to play such and such, would you like to conduct it or not? Do you have a preference, or are you not bothered?
Not really. I mean, when I had my own band, obviously I would conduct it. Occasionally here at Montclair, I've been asked to run it through in rehearsals just to cover if there's any points. When you have a professional conductor conducting the band, you sort of think, stay out of the way. Happy to play. Beginning to think that my playing days are coming towards an end. But
sorry to hear that.
Well, you get to the point where you think, I used to be able to do better than this. And I don't really want to I mean, my feeling has always been our playing should be at the very highest level, because it is an offering, and we don't offer to the Lord something second rate. Yeah. And if I can't produce as well as I should, then it's time to let. And we're in a situation where we've only got 7 trombone players available in the band, and we run with 5. So if I decide not to play anymore, there's another couple of decent players can step in,
What's the most unusual place you've heard of having a text or thing say, we played your piece of music in the band? Because I think we've had Romania and Uganda and South Korea so far. Have you ever had it? And you thought, Dolly, I never would have expected it to come from there.
The Ron Wakes Norris went to Africa to initiate, I think it was the staff band in Nigeria. And their first piece on their first Sunday morning was Ascalon. I also have a recording of an African band that should remain nameless that played the Outriders, I think. I think it was the Outriders. Every now and again I thought, yeah, it could be. And they were having a wonderful time. I mean, the enthusiasm in their playing outstrips anything we're likely to do in our sophisticated West. But
the energy and the vibrancy is just
right notes and that sort of thing. We're not at a premium.
Yeah. Is there a piece of music that comes back to haunt you? I mean, Chris James Anderson said, I'll forever be known as the Goldcrest person. And I spoke to Paul Drury and he said, I know I'll go to my grave with Jubilee written on my gravestone. Is there a piece of music that is like overly mentioned and you're like, yeah, okay?
I think Ascalon is used more than anything, but that doesn't really haunt me. There was a very, very fine man who had passed away, and Eric had been a great character. He had developed Parkinson's disease very severely, He actually wrote to me, saddest letter I've ever received. I can't play anymore. He could only play by holding his nose, because otherwise the air would come down. He couldn't control the airflow. So Eric Lovelace passed away. And the night that I'd been asked to put together a group, because the corps he went to didn't have a band at this stage. Such was the respect this man was held in. Nobody said no. People took days off work to come down and play. And the night before well, it was a celebration of praise. It wasn't a funeral. It was a fabulous event. And his wife, Joan, said, could you play Ascalon as a tribute to Eric? It was his favorite song. Yeah, no problem. And I sat down and I said to my wife, that's not good enough. He deserves something better than just Twice to the Tube Book. And that piece came together in 45 minutes. I don't know. I've always sort of felt that people who say the divine inspiration, I don't know. Well, I think there was some divine inspiration, but I think my faithfulness to develop the craft meant I was able to put it down. I think I altered 3 bars, and it's been recorded 5 or 6 times by different groups. Yeah. Frequently, Reading Central Band recorded it. And they had used it at Eric's brother's funeral. And they wrote and asked me if it was okay to use it at the brother's funeral. Well, by that time it was published. You can. But I think it was not so much respect to me, but a respect to the fact that it had been written for Eric's funeral. Did we think it would be okay? So that piece has gone. Other than that, not really. Different things come up at different times. And
so who are your kind of mentors in Salvation, the people that inspired you and you looked up to when you were developing your craft? You came out of college and they were the names that just kept coming back on the stands, and well, they were the people that were conducting the band at the Royal Albert Hall or whatever.
Well, let's condemn Ray Stem and Allen. But my father was the corps officer at Leeds Central. And we had 2 people at Leeds Central. Harry Kirk.
Really? Now there is a name.
And who told me about, because we'd play The Penitent. And a lot of people criticize The Penitent because that's this lovely quiet bit. And then it rips into a fairly robust ending. Well, Harry told me that when he wrote that, he came to the end of the quiet bit and his first wife passed away. And then he sent it to London. They said, we need something. And of course, then he'd remarried and he felt very positive. And so suddenly it rips into this very confident, triumphant, in spite of the worst thing, my faith is still strong. So that was how that came about. So when people make a comment, I always sort of say, the other fella, my father was a very good corps officer, very fine preacher, very concerned that meetings should be conducted well. And we had a deputy bandmaster who played the piano very nicely. He played Sunday morning. This is the 3 meeting, 3 open airs.
Yeah.
And this fellow Brian Tabb had played the piano Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. My father always started the Sunday night meeting with a really robust Salvation Army song, then calm it down into a prayer chorus. And he looks to his right because Brian played soprano, and Brian shook his head and pointed, and this guy with hair all over the place sort of shambles up to the platform. And I could tell my father was not best pleased because this was not the way he felt his meeting should go. Then a man called Wilfred Heaton sat down at the piano and all was well. And so my unfortunate thing with Wilfred Heaton, I was 15. I was too young to realize what I could have learnt.
Yeah.
You look back and say, yeah, 3 years later, and I could have learnt so much. But just to have known the man was tremendous.
Yeah. I mean, when this opportunity came, I was kind of, I've met 2 or 3 composers who just, my jaw drops when I talked to yourself being one of them, because I remember knowing Kevin was going to be in the band. And I thought, I've got to say hello to this guy, because I remembered saying hello to Rosemary Stedman Allen, and her father had just had a piece of music called The Mission, and it really hit me. You know, Are You Washed in the Blood of the Lamb? And it was a very kind of funky, jazzy arrangement. I said, I adore it. She said, he would love to know about that. And she said, never be afraid to tell a composer if you've enjoyed a piece of music, because it may be they've one that never got played again, got recorded once, and the privilege to be able to tell these people and to share in conversation is something I treasure. So, you know, if I ever have the chance to meet somebody and say, look, that one march you wrote, that was thrown away, that was only written for that, has never been seen again. Hey, that's my favourite.
It's important that we get feedback. When you work for the army, as I did for 25 years, there are times when you know the Lord has to have a purpose for the army, because the way that we as people handle it, we could really mess it up. And if it was down to us, the army would have failed years ago. And sometimes you go through a week and it wasn't going well. I would occasionally, and it still happens, I get an email from somebody who said, we played such and such on Sunday. We were so blessed. People came to the altar and they, yeah, it's worth doing this. Yeah. Talking about Norwich, after I talked to you at Norwich, I went upstairs and there had been an incident, I don't know if you noticed, right at the beginning of the meeting, when the bandmaster there was introducing us, somebody's phone went off. And
it does happen.
Well, it was noticeable because it was just above the trombone section. And I knew who it was. It was Susan Turner. And she is furious about people keeping their phones on in the meeting. So I went up to her. We'd known each other for a long time. Yeah. And I sort of said, guess your phone? I said, you see that little red button there? That you press that. So she hit me, which is fair enough. I said, if you press that button, it'll stop the phone from ringing during meetings. Well, while this is going on, there's a man talking to me, or rather staring at me, to the point where I started to feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And he also said, it wasn't you, was it? No, I don't think we met. Was it Norwich? Anyway,
it wasn't until after the festival had finised, and I came up to you when you were all packing away.
Now this is in the interval, and this guy is staring at me, and I thought, I'm going to deal with this. And so I said, "You enjoying the show?" Oh yeah. And he said, "Well," I said, "I'm Ralph Pearce." Yeah, okay. Are you the Ralph Pearce? Well, I don't know. I said, why do you ask that? He said, well, it turned out that at Chatteris, mm-hmm. If you probably know where Chatteris is.
Yeah, I've been there a couple of times. Lovely place.
I became a wifey band member at Chatteris and went to my first brass lessons. It turned out
my deputy bandmaster Reg Day, I think, came from Chatteris originally.
There are a lot of days there. Yeah. Some of them are happy days and some of them are miserable days.
Reg was a lovely day. Yeah.
So it turned out that we had both gone to the same wifey band practice. He'd gone on trombone, I'd gone on euphonium, and over the process of years, we'd switched. He again was too nervous to speak to me. Yeah. And I make no pretensions at all. This is a craft I have. Sometimes there's God-given inspiration, which I'm able to use the craft. Mm-hmm. But I'm just a bloke who spills curry on his shirt. Mm-hmm. Nothing special.
Well, bearing in mind that the reason for this extraordinary project that I've been given is lockdown and people not being able to get out, has this meant that compositions of phone calls and things that you've been putting off has been able to be completed? What's on the compositional bench at the moment? Anything?
Since he retired, Ron Wakes Norris has taken a group called Imperial Brass, and they've been around for quite a while. It's a classic British style brass band, 26 players, some very good players, and I'm doing quite a lot of writing for them. And I've just finished, totally unspiritual, the girl who plays euphonium, principal euphonium in that band and in the Montclair Corps band, Emily Bennett, she also sings, and she sings with the band. And I've just finished a band accompaniment for the Meredith Wilson song, Till There Was You. And so that's kept me going. Ron also found a Christmas piece by John Rutter, which nobody knows, which is absolutely gorgeous. It's not really a Christmas carol. It's called The Very Best Time of Year. It's more a Christmas song. It's not sacred in the sense of Christmas carol would be. I've arranged that. I'm now going to work on writing a signature march for them. And then I've got some things that Salvationists want. So there's always something to do. The problem has been for me recently is I work best to a deadline.
Yeah.
If you were to say, we've got a core event here in 10 days' time, we'd like a little unity series type piece, no problem. Tell me when you practice it, it'll be ready. Whereas when there isn't a deadline, nah, I go and get a cup of coffee, go and a cup of tea. We've actually found I can get great Glengettie Welsh tea online from Amazon, which is better than anything they sell. Because I often tell people that the Americans can make great coffee, they can't make tea.
Yeah, I've heard, yeah.
They don't leave it long enough. I won one concert, it was a 4th of July concert, and I said, what you don't realize is the tea in Boston Harbor is just about ready. So there we go. And if you go to Boston, you can see the ship, and they've actually got sort of fake tea chests which you can throw into the water. That's fun. That's fun. You pay for the privilege.
Oh dear. Do you have a favourite Salvation Army song at the moment?
Song?
Yeah, favourite songbook song at the moment. I mean, does it change according to mood? What's the one that's most recently pressing down on your brain that you can't get rid of and you just enjoying? Is there one?
I think there are two. One's a songbook song. I Know a Fount.
Mm-hmm.
It says so much. And also at Phoenix, every Sunday band would start off with the beginning and the end of the Tom Rive variations, that sort of gorgeous start, and then the sort of big finish. That was always, we'd have all sorts of preludes, but when we came to that, it was a case of, right, this is it, we're down, this is our final prelude piece, we're now down to business. The other one I like, and it came to me recently because my brother wanted it for a devotional at Birmingham Citadel, a Les Condon song, Why Should I Fear? And it's in Gem 7, and
I'll have to look that one up.
If you read the words are a little old-fashioned, but why should I fear life's raging seas? And it's very appropriate for the moment. Yeah. And it finishes up with a line, my pilot, thou art at the helm. And it talks about, whatever the storms and the alarms are, he's in command. And, we've been very fortunate. We live now, we had a big house in Phoenix. We now live in a fairly big condominium. Condos are apartments that you buy and you accept certain community rules. Having said that, they'd look after the roof and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very big complex. It's almost like set in a park, which means we haven't been shut in. We've been allowed to walk around in our park area, which stops you going completely crazy. And that's been something. 1,500 people live in this little community. Only 5 cases.
Correct, yeah.
Which is quite tremendous.
Yeah.
We've had fairly stringent restrictions put on us, but hey, we'll get it sorted out, and we're getting through it because New Jersey and New York have been hit tremendously. But I don't know if you've been New Jersey, New York. A lot of places people live literally on top of each other.
Yeah.
And the buildings they live in are very old, and so it's. And I mean, if you go into New York, rush hour, morning and evening, you get on the New York subway is very similar to London Underground. People crammed in against each other.
Yeah.
It's inevitable that diseases could be passed on.
Yeah. Just the close proximity to it, you can't avoid it. So,
Yeah.
Have you got a favourite Bible verse that means a lot to you?
I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. Times when that is very important. Times when people have said, can't do that. That's not doable. It's not possible. And I found that if it's the right thing to do for the kingdom, yeah, you can.
Yeah.
And
equip you for it. Yeah.
Even in Phoenix, where we lived, they weren't too keen on public displays of scripture. I had a little stone outside the door with those words on it. I thought, if you don't like it, go away.
So I just wonder why my computer decided to.
Fun?
Yeah, it's okay. There was a blip my end, but we're okay. We're going okay. So, what else besides music? What else do you like doing outside? Reading, writing, walking the dogs. What do you do when you're not composing and having to give the wife a hand?
I read a lot. I walk. I have discovered something wonderful here in the United States. It's called Willow Plus, and it covers all the cricket everywhere in the world for $5.99 a month. You can't beat it. And also with NBC's huge contract, $2 billion to the when it starts again, we get all the football games.
For you,
including the 3 o'clock games.
Oh,
and
I think there's some football fans out there going, "Yeah, I know what you mean. Give me the details."
So that's been one of the problems with this. I think a lot of us could have got through a lot better if we'd had some sport to watch. Willow's been very good. They're playing matches about 10 years old, which over here I didn't see because that didn't exist. So what with Willow and NBC Sports, I'm okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna pray with you, and then my dad is gonna want to get his supper ready. So, and I've taken up too much of your valuable time anyway, and I thank you for that. But I'm gonna pray with you, and as you wish to join in, feel free. Dear Lord, yet again, the gift of composition, the gift of music, is something that we treasure. It's something that's been with man since the dawn of time, but the ability to recognize it, to nurture it, and to grow it, Lord, particularly within the Christian church, Lord, is something you sometimes have or you don't. But we thank you, Lord, for the gift of composition that you've given Ralph. We thank you that he has so faithfully followed you all around the world with all the people that he has worked with, that you have been at the center, and that to glorify you, and that has been the principle, to make sure that the message of Jesus is heard, and that it's heard in a way that makes it relevant, Lord. Blowing your brains out to all the Christian soldiers, to people that have no idea what it means. You don't waste that, Lord, but sometimes we feel like that ain't working. But we thank you, Lord, that he recognizes the usefulness, the practicalities, and that he's eager to mentor people who maybe don't know, and that he can, from his experience, go, I've been there, I can help you, I can guide you. We thank you for his family, his friends, his co-workers, his musicians, the bands and orchestras and soloists that he meets and worships with and plays with and has fellowship with. But we thank you, Lord, that you are at the center of his life, guiding him, and he is so keen and willing to follow you in all things. In all thy ways you direct his path, Lord. And we thank you, Lord, for the work, the life and the passion and the Christian witness of Ralph Pearce. And I just thank you, Lord, for the time he's given, and the wonderful sense of humor and the passion in the stories, and in just learning these wonderful, unique experiences that form something that may just be track 5 on a CD, that it lives for people. We thank you, Lord, for that. I thank you, Lord, for Ralph, for his music and his continued obedience and acceptance to keep going and to keep composing and just to keep following your word. So I just pray your blessing on him now and his family in this time, and that he will continue to feel you closely to him in the next few days and weeks, in whatever that evolves into. But bless him now, Lord, and I put him in your hands for your safekeeping. Amen.